everybody, and welcome to the Elseworlds Exchange. I am Sal. Joining me right now is Tiffany, and of course, we're talking about the realm of adventure and imagination, so I thought we'd bring in an expert on the subject, at least as far as I'm concerned, and that is the Bard has returned. Welcome, Bard.
Hail, thank you. It's grand to be here once more in your lands, imaginary lands of electric podcastery, I guess you'd call it.
Precisely. So we're going to talk a little bit about D&D. That's right. We are finally going to discuss Dungeons & Dragons. This has been a long time coming. We've been hoping to launch into an episode just exclusively talking about D&D, the Bard and I have, for months now. And
terrible.
Well, it's wonderful because now it's finally happening, so we can get into it. Now, okay, we've talked about, off-camera, that is, our favorite editions. My favorite edition is none, because my experience is so little that I have played 4th, I have played 3rd, and I think I've played a little bit of 5th, but very, very minimally. So, but Bard, you have a very strong opinion, I believe, about which edition is best, I guess you could say.
I'm not going to call it the best. I am going to say that it's my favourite.
Okay.
It's Advanced Dungeons and Dragons 2nd edition, and I'm a bit of an advocate for this edition.
Okay.
Especially these days, I don't think it gets played enough. And there is something of a bit of an, I've heard it called an old school revival going on, people playing older editions of D&D. And 2nd edition is in kind of a weird spot, or so it seems to me, in that it's too old hat for really modern gamers to really understand, but it lacks all of the simplicity and the basicness of the really older editions, or the basic editions,
okay,
I might call them, which actually aren't older, but we'll get into that later. So it kind of gets glossed over sometimes, except for a few who are into 2nd edition's particular flavour, and I am, and I quite often like to espouse its virtues to anyone who will listen. So that's my position on the matter. Well,
I'm listening. So we've experienced D&D a little bit. Tiffany, what's your? Let's get into what's your preferred version, and then we'll see what the comparisons are.
Okay. So I've played 3.5, and just putting it out here, that was the worst experience. It was my first experience, and it was the worst experience I've ever had playing D&D.
First and worst. Nice.
And there was a moment where I was like, I'm never going to play this game again. And I gave it another try, and it still wasn't my cup of tea. I glossed completely over 4 and went right into 5. And I love 5. I love everything about 5. I like that they pared a lot of things down from the last time that I had played. And they made it more about the storytelling, which was apparently what I was looking for in the first place. Other than that, though, I haven't really played any of the earlier stuff. However, I have played plenty of MMOs, a lot of early MMOs, that were based very much on early D&D. So I feel like I have some sort of, spiritual connection to them without a full understanding of them.
Okay.
All right. You've tasted the flavour of the olden days.
Yes.
Yeah, even my experience with MMOs is the earliest. I played WoW maybe once or twice, but I did play a lot of Ultima Online when I was a kid.
Yeah, and that's really one of the big 3. It was Ultima, Asheron's Call, and EverQuest.
Right.
And EverQuest was where it was at for me.
There we go.
I'm also very fond of EverQuest. One day we should talk about EverQuest.
Yes,
we
absolutely should.
You played it for a good couple of years.
I played it for quite a long time.
My experience with EverQuest is much less than yours then.
Oh.
I played it for 1 month.
Really?
Really? Wow.
It made such an impression on me that I've never quite let go of it. And I still, to this day, will compare MMOs to it. Generally in a negative light.
No, I'm
the way it approaches them.
I'm absolutely the same way. I'm with you on that. It may have been difficult and frustrating at some times, but nothing has ever lived up to those days. That stress, that anger, that success, the triumph. Yeah.
People call it difficult and obtuse, or what? Or sorry, it doesn't matter. People call it tricky and frustrating. I call that adventure.
Yeah, absolutely.
There is no MMO except for other old hat ones that competes for the sheer I don't know what you'd call it, nail-biting terror of getting lost in Kithakor woods. when you're not the right level, you're too low level.
Yep.
That's a real survival game.
Oh, yeah.
This is the thing I always say. That's a real survival computer game. It's not about hunger meters and thirst meters.
Nope.
It's about being in the wilderness.
Yes.
Trying to get out and trying to survive in some way.
Absolutely.
That's so good.
Yes.
Now, would you say that? Oh, I was going to say, would you say your early EverQuest could compare to earlier expansions or earlier versions of Dungeons and Dragons?
As a matter of fact, I think it does have a fairly strong comparison. It's not direct comparison, not really, but it does have a strong early or mid-period D&D flavour. So I split the history of D&D up into basically 3 eras. Okay. There's the olden days, or the archaic era, which starts in 1974 and ends in 77. And there was only one version of D&D back then that sprang from chainmail. It was called Dungeons and Dragons. And then in 1977, suddenly we had 2. We had Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, also known as AD&D First Edition, and we also had a revised variant of the olden style, which changed lots of, basically a new edition. And we had these 2 veins of D&D up until the year 2000, and that's the second period. That's the grand age to me, the grand age of D&D. And then in 2000, third edition came along, and then there was only one true canon version of D&D that was being supported.
Yes.
But it's not as if these games go away when a new edition comes along. If you've got your books or any kind of, reproduced version, you can still play it, and people do still play it. And as I said, there's some sort of revival going on with the earlier editions, which I wish I was more involved in than I am.
I was going to ask, do you currently play D&D, and if so, which version do you play?
Well, tricky question, because I don't currently play, but I am currently making a game for a second edition campaign that I would like to start, and I don't have any players for it yet.
Okay.
This is pie in the sky thing that sometimes old dungeon masters do, as they start designing a campaign even though they don't have anyone to play with. So that's what I'm doing right now. And it's a product of looking at my old books again and going through them and thinking, gee, I'd really love to play this version of D&D again.
Yeah. My only experience my first experience with role-playing games at all, I was very, when I was growing up, my sword and sorcery experiences were limited to He-Man, and that was kind of it. So I was very, I didn't lean towards the concept of Dungeons and Dragons, but I did play the Star Wars RPG. When, I think in 2003 or 4 I played that one, and I was enthralled with it. I didn't even know I was interested in it, but 7 hours had gone by without my even recognizing it, and I was like, I have to leave. I'm gonna die. I haven't moved in 7 hours, but I've gone on so many adventures, and it's fantastic. I still refer to it as my epic D&D or role-playing game experience, and it was only one game. But
is it a computer game you're talking
about? No, I'm talking about a tabletop
pen and paper,
6 or 7 different players. High.
I remember that version.
High role-playing stakes. I was a smuggler. I had to seduce a baroness of her, and plant a thermal detonator somewhere. It was very ridiculous.
Exciting.
But it was exciting. I was surprised. I had always kind of because my friends, when I was growing up, were very much into role-playing, but of the live-action variety.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
And that was something that I tried once and then ran into a bear and then never tried again. And so, as such, I thought maybe the wilderness, the fictional wilderness, is more my speed. But yeah, the mechanics of Dungeons and Dragons or of role-playing games in general, that's what really always hooks me up. I'm always hamstrung by the mechanics or the mathematical quality to it. Is that because I haven't found the right edition, or is that because I am a dummy?
I don't think it's because you're a dummy.
Okay.
Edition does play a lot into it, because when you first approach D&D, no matter what edition, there's a really good chance the mechanics are going to hit you in the face very hard.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter how basic you get either. You're going to come across tables and numbers and so forth. With luck, when it's your first time, you'll be with a table of people who know the game quite well.
Yes.
And the mechanics are important, and if you don't enjoy playing with those mechanics, you're not going to enjoy the game.
Mm-hmm.
That's it. That's why some people like some editions and they don't like other editions. And
It's true, and I think for you, because the first time that you played D&D was also 3.5.
Yes.
And I can tell you right
That
now,
was weak.
Depending on the background you come from, I think makes a huge difference too. Because while I didn't really enjoy it, I had a little bit of an easier time than you did.
You did.
But I had played a lot of MMOs. I played a lot of fantasy RPGs where I was used to seeing some of these terms, some of the ideas behind it, because of course D&D made such a mark on the world that you find it in all elements of pop culture. So I think without that background, it was a little more difficult for you to just kind of jump into it because it was so rule heavy. It was
very rule
so
heavy.
many skills. It was like the menu was endless on what you could choose.
Yeah, and thankfully, because Tiffany was the DM at the time.
No, it wasn't for that.
Was it?
That was Ben.
Oh, that's right, it was Ben. Tiffany made a whole bunch of note cards with all of our spells and all of our modifiers on them. And they were color coded, and like that was in and of itself still frustrating because I had to root through my cards. Mm-hmm. But I'm thankful I had them because you just went through the books and you copied out of like the spells from the books about like what class we were and what level we were at and stuff like that. That was a huge help, and it was still a hindrance for me to play that game.
Second edition didn't have that particular problem.
Now I'm asking,
It had weird mechanics in it, and it was quite rules heavy in its own way. But a lot of the most basic stuff you need to know is very easy to learn. It's just it's very apparent. But at the same time, modern gamers. The thing about old editions of D&D, and my major amount of experience with older editions is with second edition. Like I've never played the first edition of AD&D, so I can't really talk about that. No, it was well before my time.
Well, sure, I'm not implying you're older, but I know
I've never played it, just never had occasion to. Like I've read the books and everything.
Sure.
And I think it sounds like this grand edition, and I'd love to play it one day, but I've never played it. It would be very difficult for a modern player who is coming from, say, post third edition D&D, any variety, to approach the second edition, because the circumstances they're approaching it with are so different to the ones that we approached it with back in the day, because not only has the environment of games changed, the zeitgeist of how role-playing games are played has actually changed, and the nature of fantasy fiction that has changed too, its flavour has changed as well. So you have to you can't just go into it raw and expect the edition to be good. You kind of got to meet it halfway in its own context. It's like me trying to appreciate Watchmen, Sal. I think we talked about this one day.
It's true, yeah.
I can't really appreciate why Watchmen is important. Intellectually, I can know that it is, because people can tell me and explain why.
Sure.
But unless I'm in the 80s, or I don't know when it came out exactly.
Yeah, it was 86.
Unless I'm there in the environment of comics at the time, reading this landmark thing that comes out, I won't have the experience of why it's important. I won't feel it.
Well, sure. It's a deconstruction, and if you don't know what it's deconstructing or even no experience with it, then it's just gonna be on its own. It's not gonna have any transcendence. So with second edition, what are some things that you would say stand out compared to like a more modern edition?
All right. Well, for a start, if a modern gamer picked it up, they'd read a little bit and then they'd probably say, "What? I mean, I have to qualify to be an elf? I can't just choose?"
Really? Okay.
Ooh.
And if I'm an elf, I can't be a paladin? What? They're going to be very confused about certain things that are traditional to the game up to that point, and which really reflect quite strongly sort of the fantastic imagination at the time, and the way high fantasy was perceived by players of this game, and in literature even at that time. It's going to be quite jarring, but at the same time, it's hang on, I lost my train of thought.
Oh, sure.
It's going to be quite jarring for modern players to try and get a grip on some of the things, because they will only see limitations. They will only see things being taken away from them. And that's why when 5th edition came out and it was championed as kind of a throwback to the olden days, I kind of complained because it had too much stuff in the core book that I didn't think should be there. And I can't express enough how important it is for D&D to be kind of stripped back from what it is. This is one of the things I hate about modern editions, is that they've got too much stuff in there. Like, why is there tieflings in the core book and those dragon men, which are there for some reason? I forget their name. Dragonborn.
Yes, Dragonborn.
And even monks, like stuff that was in the first edition of AD&D. The monk was there, but it wasn't in second edition. This is why I think second edition is a representation of Dungeons and Dragons when its identity as a game and its identity as an expression of high fantasy themes was at its strongest at the time. And certainly I think its version of the various classes are at their strongest in second edition, and they've only got weaker and more dilute since. And if you compare it to third edition, we come across third edition as an edition that for the first time classes suddenly became mechanically difficult to play. If you compare the first edition, the second edition fighter with the third edition fighter, all of a sudden the third edition fighter is a complete mess that can break down if you make the wrong choices in feat selection, which is why I kind of hate feats. I hate having to build a character instead of being a character. So you've got to spend all this time as a character that you don't want to be or that you didn't envision, trying to build the one you're actually fantasizing about or fantasizing as playing, instead of just starting as them, which is what you kind of do in second edition. So it's quite clear that there was a huge shift in the philosophy of role-playing design in the halls of Wizards of the Coast when the third edition came out. And,
do you think it was
in the philosophy of play?
Do you think it's just because they wanted it to be more accessible, or do you think that they just got ahead of it, like they got in their own way?
Well, Wizards didn't write the second edition. Now, I can't obviously speak to what happened in the company, of course.
Right.
But second, or why it was written this way, I don't know what was mandated by editorial or some overseers to the designers, because I respect the designers of all the editions basically very, 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 very highly, because it's no mean feat to design a game like Dungeons and Dragons. Any flavor. But there is such a gulf in the philosophy between second edition and third edition that I have to believe that that Wizards... Actually, I think I can draw a comparison.
Okay.
And that's, if you look at the fighter and its feats, trying to build a fighter over his whole career, over, say, the 20 levels, isn't that different when you think about it to trying to make a deck of Magic the Gathering cards. Because you've sort of got to sort through the feats, find out which ones work well together, and you've got to find out the broken ones, like the trap choices that are in there that don't really work and that you shouldn't take. And it's impossible to just be a fighter, which traditionally is the most basic and easygoing class mechanically.
It's usually my life.
Yeah.
Yeah. All of a sudden, it's a complete mess. And I didn't realise this until a friend of mine said to me, when I was running games at third edition, he said, you probably shouldn't suggest fighter for new players. It really takes a lot of forethought and advanced game knowledge to do it properly without ruining the class within a couple of levels. And I thought about it, and he was right. He was absolutely right. Because I played third edition for a long while. I ran sessions of it for years. And even during that point, I remember, it's not easy to admit, but back then I thought second edition was rubbish. I'd come from second edition and I'd embrace third edition a little while after its release. And I'd sit around with people and I'd have a laugh. Second edition and its list of pole arms and its THACO rule. How rubbish is that? We'd all have a huge laugh about it. And I'd accept basically as received wisdom that third edition was better mechanically and that it was better in thematically, just because people said so, and I'd sort of suppress what I was really thinking or what I was really feeling. And I remember, I don't remember exactly when this happened, but it was sometime much later. I was flipping through the book, and the thought just popped into my head and probably into my mouth. I turned the page and just said, I hate this. I hate it. I was done with it. All the things that I didn't like about it, its weird mechanics, its over-infusion of mechanics in areas where it should be much more simple. I just stopped playing. I stopped playing.
Oh.
Wow.
I left it. And in recent years, I went back and had a look at D&D second edition. This was back when the first beta versions of the 5th edition were coming out, when it was called D&D Next, and my friend got a beta version of playing that.
Yeah.
And that's when the comments about it being a bit of a throwback were really true. And I was all, haha, second, you don't want to really play second edition, those rules were rubbish. And I went back to my second edition books, ostensibly to laugh at how old-fashioned it was, and I found, no, this is actually the way I wanted to do it all along. It's been here all along. These rules that I like. Because if I wanted to run something really old-fashioned with 5th edition D&D, with 5th edition players, I could never do it. Like, I could never say to them, like, halflings can only be fighters and thieves.
Right.
Okay.
And clerics. Like, I can't, because all I would be doing is taking away from the game they play. Whereas if I wanted to run a more modern version of D&D with 2nd edition, all I'm doing is giving.
Right.
I'm giving. That's why I think D&D kind of has this duty to be the cornerstone of role-playing, which it is, because even today people find role-playing and Dungeons & Dragons as terms, but basically synonymous. Do you play D&D, they'll say, still, even today. And I think D&D has a duty to be as easy for people to accept as possible. And what I mean by that is that when a new player or prospective player comes along and says, well, D&D, what's that all about? You should be able to say something like, well, you know Lord of the Rings?
Right.
It's like that.
You can do that, yeah.
But when you say something like, well, you know Lord of the Rings, it's like that, except. And the more that comes after the except is a problem. And I think all the weirder stuff that they like to put in, extra planar stuff, like half-demon characters, some of the class changes and things like that should be in expanded edition. Like, I haven't got any problem with it being in the game, but it should be in source books and extra parts and whatnot. And the core experience should be as default, plain Jane, generic fantasy as possible, because you can only go up from there. You can only expand out from there. And if that's what you want, you have to take away from.
Yeah. No, it's true, and I often wonder, because I and correct me if I'm wrong, but 3rd edition was really Wizards of the Coast's first foray into making their putting their mark on D&D, correct?
It was. Sure was.
So, and of course that of course comes in the 90s. Everything's more extreme. Everything's more cutting edge at that point. And I feel like now for them to include something like the Tiefling, for them to include something like the Dragonborn, I think we have to blame partially that's their choice, but also they constantly have to listen to their public's feedback. They have it coming at them from all angles now. It used to be you could just send a letter and that was kind of the end of it. But they're hearing it everywhere. I bet that those are fan favorites. And of course they want to play to their current audience while hoping to expand their audience to the new player, to someone who's a new adventurer. But I wonder if they feel more beholden to doing what the players want.
Or what they think the players want.
Yes, as opposed to what they think might be best.
Or what will make them look good.
Right.
Well, there's a really interesting indicator of this in the 5th edition core rules. When you look at the race listings and you go to elf, what's the example picture there? It's a dark elf.
Yes. Oh, yeah.
This is unheard of in D&D era, when they were just like the enemy, and you could play as them if your DM decided and you had like the book with maybe the rules or made up your own rules. No problem. No problem with them being there.
Right. Well,
now it's so weird, because the dark elf traditionally is the exception to the rule. It's the dark elf hero. That's why Drist is such an interesting character.
Yes.
And for them to just put that as not just an example of a kind of elf you can play, but the flagship. This is, bang, the elf.
Yes.
This is what you think of. The example art in the 5th edition book leaves a lot to be desired. I don't want to harp on it.
That's fair. That's very fair. It's funny too, because when you say that it's it's a dark elf and you mention Dritz, of course it is him.
Yes.
And they make sure to let you know that, which is in and of itself brilliant marketing.
Yeah.
Because I could go and I can Google him and I'd be like, oh, and now I can read
all their adventures. But it also takes away from the ability for you to ascribe yourself a character when the default character is someone else who has already gone on many adventures. It's not you being able to project yourself onto a template and then imagine the adventures you're going on.
Exactly. I don't know, honestly, offhand, if there are really any other characters whose portraits are named specifically, or if it's just Dritz. They're like, there you go. Here he is. Go look him up, ladies. I mean, overall, I have always thought, even before I ever played D&D, that D&D was this grand story. Like, once I got past the whole, like, stereotype of it. The stereotyping of a bunch of people playing in a basement
Yes.
and it just being like arguing. I was like, I had this whole other idea in my head where I was like, oh, it's storytelling. It's an opportunity to play the games I like to play digitally, but with my friends in the same room and like have this adventure together. And then you plop down something like 3.5 or 3rd edition,
Right.
and all of a sudden I miss the computer that's running my game doing all the math for me.
Yeah.
Because now I'm stopping and being like, okay, wait, hang on, I have to check like 7 different modifiers, and I have to check what the skill actually does and what its save is and if there's any sort of special effects on it. And it just stops being my adventure and starts being a lot of work. And as soon as something starts to be that much work, for me it ceases to be fun.
Yeah.
You would love 2nd edition, I think, if you got a good intro to it, or even the basic version. But 2nd edition is good. You know, I'm sure you've heard of THAC0.
Yes.
I Googled it recently because you mentioned it. You mentioned THAC0, and I was...
People make fun of THAC0 all the time.
It sounds horrendous.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you this, it's not intuitive. Like, there's nothing about the word THAC0which lets you derive what it actually is.
No.
Like, it's not like armor class where it kind of indicates maybe the purpose of this rule.
Mm-hmm.
THAC0 is an acronym, for those who don't know. That means 2-hit armor class 0.
Yes.
Which is another thing that baffles outsiders to the 2nd edition game or the earlier versions. Your armor class is better as the number gets lower.
Right.
This makes perfect sense to me. This has never challenged me conceptually. People talk about it like it's absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah.
I guess I'll get into that.
Yeah, let's hear it.
With THAC0, it's actually a secretly brilliant rule. Because when you play any of these modern versions, when you roll the dice as a player, you say, all right, I attack. You roll your dice. What have you got to do? You've got to add this modifier. You've got a base attack bonus at least, or a proficiency bonus, or whatever it is these days. You've got to add on. Then you add any situational modifiers and so forth. The beauty of THAC0, right, is for a start, it's a simple rule to understand. All you do is subtract the armor class of the enemy from your THAC0 number to get the number you roll to hit. It's really simple, and the best thing that makes it even more simple is that you don't even have to worry about it. There is only one person at the table who worries about THAC0 ever, and that's the Dungeon Master. All you do is you roll and you look at the number. You don't add anything because your THAC0, which is an indicator of how good you are as a warrior.
Right.
Basically, it's just like the inverse of the base attack bonus, sort of numerically.
Okay.
It means the same thing. It's how skilled you are in combat at the fighting stuff. That's what THAC0 is. You roll and you look at the number, and the Dungeon Master will say you hit or you miss. Oh, well, he won't say it that simply. He'll probably say your sword glances off your shield and snarls, or something exciting like that.
Exactly.
But in purely mechanical terms, it's either a success as an attack or it's a fail as an attack. And you don't have to worry about anything. And how great is this for beginners?
Yeah.
And as they level up, they don't have to add more numbers, but by, say, rolling a 14, like 2 levels ago, that 14 would have missed. But now, with the THAC0 improved, presumably through leveling, your 14 is better, and it will hit tougher opponents. So your worst rolls get better, and you don't have to worry about adding a bunch of numbers on. This is the most beautiful thing about THAC0, is that players don't have to worry about it at any level. Eventually they'll learn how the rule works, because they have to write their THAC0 on the character sheet, and sometimes that's your THAC0. Because it's derived from Basic Edition and the earliest editions, which didn't have THAC0. They had a chart which listed your class and what you needed to roll to hit every armor class, basically, at that level.
Wow.
And people simplified it to THAC0,
Okay.
where all you had to know was that one number anyway to extrapolate the rest. So you didn't have to worry about it. And descending armor class, it also confuses people, but I think it's brilliant because, well, for a start, it's thematically brilliant, because would you rather, given the choice, would you rather fly second class or first class? Which one's better?
First class.
First class, of course.
Of course. So if your armor class is 10, that's 10th rate protection, basically. No protection, it's just you and your wits.
Right.
If Sal and I, assuming we were average men, got into a fist fight, we'd have about an average chance, you would assume 50-50 mechanically, of hitting each other. That's THAC0, because we don't have any extra protection. Our dex bonus probably doesn't amount to much.
Right.
I can't speak for Sal, but mine doesn't amount.
Yeah, you're pretty accurate.
So the lower you get, you can think of it in those terms. And I think it's extrapolated from old Battleship rules, not the board game Battleship, but old wargaming Battleship rules, where armor was referred to by class, like that's first class armor.
Right. Okay.
And of course, when you're a beginner, it makes a lot of sense when it's first explained to you, because of course third class armor will be better than fifth class armor, and of course first class armor will be better than everything. Of course, that's the best armor. And then you'll hear about armor class 0. Because there's this THAC0 rule. 0! How good must that be?
Right.
Right? Yes. There's an armor class 0? And then all of a sudden, what's that monster's armor class? -3? Negative? What? When I was first starting in second, it blew my mind that you could get negative. Not just 0, but negative. And this is why it matters, okay? Because 0 is such a beautiful numeral to act as a boundary between the mundane and the special. See, with first class armor, it's expected that you'll eventually get there. Or if you're a warrior, you'll probably wind up with big plate mail and you'll be fine. And that's really good armor. But when you come to 0 and you come to the negatives, you've crossed over into another realm of armor that's really special. It feels special should you get there, because you're not just first class, you're in the negatives, you're beyond first. You're in the realm.
So it's not so much that it is, because it really is just an inverse of raising your class. It's like having a plus 20, but instead it's going in the other direction. But it ascribes meaning to numbers as opposed to just saying, I have an arbitrary increase in my armor bonus.
Right, which, I mean, players love that in a way. Like, there are plenty of people now, and I'm sure people who are playing MMOs that came between 2nd edition and 3rd edition who are used to, like, well, I got to get the best gear because I got to have the highest numbers, because when I go and like, do a run of some kind, like, those monsters are going to be even higher level, and I can then say, like, my armor class is like 200. You know what I mean? Like, you're
creating artificial importance on a number, arbitrary importance on numbers that don't have any importance or specialness except with you, as opposed to with THAC0, and like, I'm not necessarily saying it's the best, but I am saying that the benefit, at least as far as the Bard's concerned, is that the benefit is that it uses a commonality of language. Everyone agrees with why certain levels are special and what is good versus less good or more good.
Yeah.
Well, it's evident. Compare it to the 3rd edition, where, of course, 20 comes after 19, but it's just a number. It's not 0.
Right.
It's not a special number that sits on the boundary between these two, the positive and negative realm, if you want to think of it.
That's true.
You don't have to think of it that way. All it means is that it's a dividing line between ordinary and really special.
Right.
And, of course, 21 comes after 20, big deal.
Yeah.
It just means my armor's better.
Yeah.
What do you want?
Yeah, but like, players love that. They really, really do. And I often wonder if Wizards' own experience with Magic the Gathering, and of course you're always looking for the 7/7 creature with flying, like, you want the bigger numbers and you want to be able to pull those out of your deck, and like, it's that mentality of bigger is better. Bigger will always be better, and maybe I can use strategy in some way to defeat the Goliath on the field, but more than likely the person with the larger army, the stronger army, is going to win.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, bigger is better, but better is also better on its own.
Oh, I agree.
I don't think the difference has actually got to do with increasing numbers. I think it's just getting better. Because we had the same feeling back then when our armor class was getting lower.
Right.
-1. Walk in, we'd say. Negative was a big day when you got to -1.
Right. No, I completely understand that, but I wonder if, because again, these guys now, like Wizards of the Coast, they're a company. You know what I mean? They've got a marketing team. They've got people who have to come and say,
how do I sell this?
How do I sell -1?
Yeah, I mean, and without comparing it to golf.
Right, and like, so I think that this is where, and this happens to a lot of companies, where suddenly we have to make money, we have to sell a product. So it becomes this like fight between like, well, players get it, people who play it now, they understand it, they know what it means, it's a good product, to but I can sell a big number.
It's accessibility versus sellability.
Yes.
I don't hold with ruminations on cynicism.
Oh, I am so cynical when it comes to marketing, but part of that is because I work with marketers.
Yes.
I'll give you another angle. I'll give you another possibility. Well, maybe it's not an isolated. These things probably happened at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
Third edition was also praised because it got all the numbers going in the same direction. Because you see, for some parts of second edition, the higher number is better.
Right.
The higher strength is more.
Right.
But your armor class, it's lower is better. Is that it? A lot of newcomers did get caught up on this sort of
Right.
thing. Lower is better here, but it's not better here. Why? Why can't it all just be higher? Because they'd rationalise it out. And so with third edition, everything is higher, but I think it's a much more mechanically difficult and an annoying game to play.
Yes, I absolutely. When you're sitting there and you're trying to kill like a kobold, which you're like,
we had during our first venue or venture out into the realm of D&D as a team, as a group together a few years ago. We tried to take out this. I don't remember what the hell the monster was now, but it was in a cave or a dungeon or something, and it nearly killed everyone.
it wasn't an individual; it was a group of kobolds.
That's what it was. It was just, but it was just a complete nightmare, and it went from a thing that was supposed to be a friendship building, romp to a slog. It was just effort. And we lost 3 players after that, and not to the game. Like, we lost them to their interest. They went home. They were like, "All right, well, I'm never going to play this again."
That's terrible. That's a horror story to me.
It is.
Just getting bored and leaving.
Yeah, that's really what it was.
I've had more bored players with third edition than I have with any other edition.
Yeah.
I've only played fifth edition a little,
Okay.
so I can't really speak to my experience with fifth edition. I only played a little bit.
It's funny. I technically haven't played it. I've only DM'd it.
Right.
Yeah, actually, I DM'd it a little, and I played it. I played it more than I DM'd it.
Okay.
I've DM'd a lot more than I've played. Years. That's my position on it. I like it more.
I was going to ask, which do you prefer?
When you're the dungeon master, it's always your turn. Be gone.
Not wrong about that.
You're not wrong about that. I like playing. I like the camaraderie of it, but there's something about, especially, and again, maybe this is the same with second edition, but with fifth edition, I found that what I loved was that I had a storyline. I was crafting a story, but I could leave a lot of things pretty open-ended because first of all, I trusted my players, but the game itself let me put story first and let them be a huge part of the story making as we went.
Yeah.
And that delighted me.
Well, that's how it should be. And it's kind of weird that it's not that way as an assumed thing. Is it so? I don't know if we've...
It depends on who's DMing, I think.
Made it otherwise.
I think it depends on it because, and he might listen to this at some point, but we have a friend, and I would describe him kind of as a min-maxer.
Yeah.
And he tried to DM it at one point, you know what I mean? Like, so that was very, like, we had to stick to rules, we had to do this, like, we're always trying to, whatever, and I'm like, just, like, and I think it just depends on the players themselves and the DM's purpose, you know what I mean? Like, I'm sure there are some people who really like sticking to the rules, who really like well, no, I get this on a technicality.
Right.
And that's their enjoyment. That's where they find the fun of it. But we've just been lucky to surround ourselves with people who do like story. So
yeah, they're much more obsessed with story.
Yeah.
Oh, that's grand. No, it's true about third edition where it prized the mechanics of the game. They were so proud of them.
Oh
yeah.
They were.
The mechanics. That it really put them forward. And I think it really did get in the way of trying to tell a story.
Yeah.
Like a question when you're in a combat with a monster, let's say you're fighting an orc, and you say, I want to trip him over.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
In third edition, there's a rule for that.
Yes.
And of course, you don't really want to do it unless you've got the feats.
Yep.
To make it.
Yeah.
In second edition, if I was in a fight, just going back to my earliest days with my old DM, Frankie G, I'd say, I want to trip this orc over. He'd say, okay, how? And I'd have to come up with a way to do it.
Right.
A lot of the time, it's just pure... You can try all this stuff. The more rules for things you put into the game, the more limited your players' imaginations are. You're putting them in this little box. Fourth is the worst for. I don't even want to talk about fourth. Fourth is an abomination. It is abysmal. Now, I'm sure it works just fine as a game mechanically, and it's probably fun to play. It might well be a good game, but it is horrendous D&D. It's terrible D&D. It's not... And it's evident in the fact they abandoned all of the traditions that Fourth tried to establish.
Right. I heard, and I have very little experience with that, but I heard they were trying desperately to tie that into a digital presence of D&D, and then they abandoned that project. So, so it's like they were trying to do too many things with the edition, and nothing went through.
Yeah.
I recently had a flip through of the Fourth, and because I'd never really looked at it. When it first came out in 2008, I remember being up at the hobby shop and they said the 4th edition's out and it's great. And they were saying how much better than 3rd it was, and I said, well, these guys can't be right. I'm just going to assume it's rubbish, and I didn't look at it. I didn't even look at it. Like, my favourite role-playing game of all time is Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 2nd edition.
Yes.
And I went off and played that. As much as I'm an advocate for AD&D 2nd edition, it's not even my favourite role-playing game of all time.
Really?
I went off, no. It's up there. It's like 2nd place, but it's I will like Wolfrup 2nd edition more forever for various reasons. It'd take a long time to explain all the little minutiae of why I prefer, and it's not about it being better mechanically or anything. It just happens to be that I love that game. I think it works extremely well. So it's got some problems. Like, I'm not saying it's the holy grail of game design, because it's got some of the same problems that 3rd edition's got, and that there's a lot of minutiae and specific rules for specific things you do in combat so that your players stop thinking. The worst thing 3rd edition started was encouraging using miniatures at the table. Ooh, terrible.
Yes.
As soon as I put miniatures down, I tried it a couple of times. Imagination bubble, gone.
Yes.
They're just hunching over the table playing a miniatures game then.
That's funny, because for me, when I think of Warhammer, for me that's synonymous with miniatures.
Oh yeah, but the RPG isn't.
No,
Right.
but like in D&D, and I found that, alright, so the idea of the miniature, like, in a larger group, I kind of get the idea. Sometimes you need to know, or at least that's how it was presented in 3.5, but it ended up becoming arguing about, the box I was in, what I could actually see.
Yes. Well, and as I understand, not to get into cynical territory again, but I understand Wizards has a relationship with a miniature making company, and so they are working together, like hand in hand, with upcoming editions and with storylines, so they can promote and sell and work with each other to get their miniatures sold and such, like, and make them inexorably tied to the game.
Yeah, they started doing miniatures in the 3rd edition. About 2003, I think. D&D miniatures were a big thing promoted in Dragon Magazine at the time, if I remember correctly. I might have the year wrong, but...
Well, but around that range. So let's see. Go ahead.
Oh no, I had a question, because it was something that came up a lot when I was trying to just get myself a little familiar with the earlier editions of D&D. But I noticed that there was something that people talked about a lot, which were non-weapon proficiencies and what they equated to in modern versions of it. How do you feel about them, and how do you feel about what they've done with them?
I think they're glorious. they're a wonderful rule from AD&D 2nd edition.
Okay.
That's what I'm familiar with them from. I think they're perfectly simple. They're perfectly good. The problem people seem to have with them is that a lot of them can have their own little rule. Like, 3rd edition had this unifying mechanic, the core mechanic, they called it, of rolling your d20 against a difficulty. What was it called? A DC?
Yeah, it was a difficulty check, essentially.
Yeah.
A difficulty class. So, and that governed everything. Holy hell, that's boring.
Yes.
And it's terrible if you're trying to make a rule, because all of a sudden, if you want to do something like, say hunting, all right? If you want to make a rule that governs how you hunt in the wilderness for 3rd edition, it's got to be done by this rule, because everything's got to be done by this rule. It doesn't matter if you've come up with something that reflects how good hunting is, or really is evocative of the experience of hunting. So you've got some mechanic that's a little closer. You can't do it, because you have to do it by the core mechanic. I I've got my second edition book here, and I'm going to have a look.
All right.
Let's see what hunting does. Because I don't remember. It's been a long while since I. Here we are.
Do you have hunting in there?
Proficiencies. Hunting.
They
I'll read it out.
Oh, that's right.
When in wilderness settings, the character can attempt to stalk and bring down game. Proficiency check must be made with a -1 penalty to the ability score for every non-proficient hunter in the party. So if everyone has this proficiency, there's no penalty. An ability check is easy. It's just you roll the d20 and the objective is to roll under your ability score.
Oh.
Yep. It's that simple. No problem. And if you do it, you succeed.
Right. And there's no other additions. It's simply you do it. You don't have to qualify it or anything.
Right. And my understanding is there was almost a non-weapon proficiency for almost any or almost everything that you might encounter.
Yeah, there is. There is, and as you level up, you get more proficiency slots, I think they call them, and you can add proficiencies as you will. They separate it into weapon proficiencies and non-weapon proficiencies, really. So.
And those were available to everyone, correct?
Yes.
Which was in and of itself that's kind of neat because, it's an equalizer essentially.
Right. Where it differs. Do you mean weapons? Because they're not available to everyone.
Oh no, I meant the non-weapon ones.
Oh yeah. For the most part, like every class type has a list of proficiencies that only it can take. Like if you're the wizarding class, you can get astrology and engineering.
Okay.
Like there's a general one. There's one for priests, one for rogues, one for warriors, and one for wizards. Everyone can have the general ones, and if you're in one of the other groups, you can have those too.
Okay.
And some of them take a varied number of slots. Some go up to 3. I think there's only 1 or 2 that require you to spend 3 slots, but they're very involved, like weaponsmithing, I think.
Gotcha. So, really, that kind of became this all-encompassing skills section, where instead of knowing if you could hunt or not, you had to, essentially, the DM would have to decide, well, does that have to do with animal handling, or does that have to do with, depending on the situation?
Yeah, I didn't like that. What really turned me off skills is that it diluted the classes a little bit.
Okay.
You see, class stuff is in the skills, even if it's cross-class. So that means any clown can get it. And what I'm referring to specifically here is stuff like what the thief is known for doing, like pickpocketing. Sleight of hand, I think, is a skill really cross-class for most classes. In second edition, the only person who can find traps, can pick locks and the like, is the thief. The bard can do it, kind of.
Okay.
They've got like a more limited list of the skills that the thief has, and I don't think he doesn't have them all. I remember that.
Right.
Only the thief can do this. Right? They're the only ones who can hide in shadows, who can move silently. This is a special thing that the thief and only the thief can do. See how much that adds to simply the conceptual strength, the thematic strength, and the mechanical strength of the class.
Yeah.
Is wonderful, because they can't be replaced by someone else. Like,
right.
Not even the other rogue, the bard, can really replace them.
Right.
Well, it encourages diversity in your party.
Yes, because I have seen that too, where the party will, in later editions, like whether it be anywhere from 3rd to 5th, you'll get together and everyone will be like, okay, well, I'm taking this, you take that.
Right.
So that you're like an unstoppable juggernaut of a team going through this campaign, instead of having to actually, potentially not be able to easily succeed at something.
Or give each member of the party some unique role to play, or some key moment to have.
Oh, I agree. I've seen that in the most recent campaign I ran. We had 2 dwarves.
Yes.
One was a fighter and one was a cleric, and they ended up taking, because they were both dwarves, they were trying to work it into their backgrounds. One was a hill dwarf, one was a mountain dwarf, so they played a lot with that. That was very fun. But because of their backgrounds, they ended up having a lot of overlay in certain skills, even though they were 2 separate classes. But I guess I found it difficult at times to make one of them have a moment in the spotlight, because they could both do very similar things.
Yeah.
So I could see where second edition, you would feel very special as that character.
Oh, yeah. It's also easier to do well as a class. Like, the classes had minimum ability score requirements. You couldn't just walk up with any old score and be a paladin. I guess is the most famous, the most restricted. But you could be a perfectly good fighter. Its only requirement, ability score wise, was you needed to have 9 strength.
Okay.
And in modern D&D, 3rd edition and up, playing a fighter with 9 strength will seem absolutely absurd.
Yes.
to play. They'll think that's absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, a lot of them I know from experience think 17 is too low.
Really?
I could see that.
Back in the early 2000s, I played a game of 3rd edition. I went to the hobby shop. It was a completely different one back then. I sat down with this DM, and he said, "All right, well, what's your 18?" And I said,
"Wow.
Well, what's your 18 going to be? Everyone's got to have an 18.
Right.
Otherwise you're useless."
Wow.
This is the thing. In 2nd edition, just for strength, 9 doesn't incur a penalty. Matter of fact, you don't get any kind of penalty until down about 5 or 6, I think.
Okay.
And when you're down that far, you're too low to be a warrior anyway. So you don't have to worry about it in that regard.
Right.
Yeah, I'm looking at it right now. Yeah, 6 and 7, you get a -1 to your hit probability, means -1 to your roll. And you don't get any damage adjustment at all.
Right.
And all the rest that it lists is just how much you can carry and what you can lift over your head, basically, and the roll you need to open a jammed door, that sort of thing. And you don't get a bonus to your attack roll until 17.
Wow.
And that's +1.
Oh.
Wow.
Now, bearing in mind that 17 strength is Conan level.
Yeah.
That's really strong. A +6 is significant. You see what I mean by not having a modifier on your roll?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Makes the modifiers special. So if you've got high strength, you get to think, wow, I get to add +1 to my roll when I attack a monster, and I get to add maybe to my damage too.
Right.
And when you get magical weapons, that makes them special because they're one of the only things that ever adds a plus to your attack roll.
Yeah.
So special.
Yeah, now...
More magical. There's a quality to it that I really appreciate.
I agree. Now it seems like, as much as I do enjoy 5th edition, even in that, it seems like a lot of times you spend your moments deciding what your action will be and rolling, then trying to figure out how to make that roll work. Like, all right, how am I going to make this work? Let me check. Can I use this? Can I use that?
Yeah.
Is this technically this?
That is very different, even from our experience when we played the one game of the DC Comics RPG.
Yes. Well, I play... Okay, so occasionally when I do DM with close friends, I don't know if you want to call it, house rules or homebrewed or anything like that, but I'll play fairly fast and loose with the rules because, again, for me in those situations, all I care about is the players are having a good time and they're enjoying the story. And at the end of the day, it's a game, and I want you to have fun. So we were playing this DC
Adventures. It's a variant on Mutants and Monsters.
I don't know if it's Mutants and...
Mutants and Masterminds.
That's it.
Never played it.
Well, you've been having a hard time wrapping your head around the mechanics for Mutants and Masterminds.
Yeah, I really have. I've had to go through several forums, reading people's explanations of them, and it seems like even people who know it fairly well
admit that it's kind of it's hard to wrap your head around it because it seems to be deceptively simple.
And it seemingly is, and I'm no expert on it at all, but it seemingly is. It only requires to know a few numbers and a little bit of subtraction, essentially. But they understand that if you're coming from a different gaming background, you're going to have a hard time with it. And if you... it's really, you have to play it.
Yes.
You have to play it with someone who probably already knows how to do it to truly understand it. So I might have to go to my local gaming shop and get someone to give me a little run-through of it because I have a really loose idea of it. But even that, in D&D, even in the 3rd edition, in the 4th edition, in the 5th edition, you could kind of figure out how combat worked from the book. Right. Even if it was convoluted and it was overly intricate. You could eventually ascertain what was going on. I read that I read the DC book. I
still have no idea.
I can't figure it out from that book.
It's weird.
Sounds awful.
It's fun for me. Playing it was more fun, I think, than trying to make it work.
Because in that instance, much of the combat, in a sense, I guess in a
It's
way,
Pascal.
like, well, yeah, I was going to say like, a little bit like THAC0, it really falls on the DM to
decide how it is accomplished.
Yeah,
it's
or
more
to,
just like, I do this, and it's like,
and
well,
then you roll. Yeah.
Roll a certain, like, roll above a certain number, and you have succeeded in whatever you said you were going to do.
In its most simplistic sense, yes. And so I think for the players, I think that can often be
freeing.
It is very freeing. It puts a little more
Stress on you. Certainly.
A little bit. It's not bad. But back to D&D. Do you ever feel like when the players are spending so much time trying to optimize characters that it essentially, do you feel like it can ruin the spirit of the game, or do you feel like sometimes having options can also be very freeing for the player?
Well, the truth is there's no one true canon way to play Dungeons and Dragons, and all of the various approaches are all perfectly, I guess they are as valid as each other. But certainly, it can eat into the spirit of the game when someone's trying to game the mechanics. It was certainly a lot more difficult to do in 2nd edition, because if you got really high stats back then, it was considered a triumph and you were the toast of the town.
Right.
You couldn't just get them.
You earned them.
You had to roll them.
Yeah.
So, and it was something to be celebrated, and you had that character. Because that game was balanced differently than it is these days as well. 3rd edition really did a number on balance. That's a whole other thing.
Yeah.
I've never really been in a position where I've had a player who is just trying to get whatever's advantageous and not get into the spirit of role-playing and not worry about what their character is like or how they feel, or all of these different things that we generally like to embrace as role-players.
Yeah.
It's never really happened. I had one player once who wouldn't take something because, well, it doesn't really give me any advantage.
Oh.
But that really just stemmed from not wanting to lose their character, because
Gotcha.
it stemmed from valuing their character in that instance. It's not, right, I've got to beat this game, I've got to be the best.
Right.
I need... see, I don't and I never have related to the obsession with trying to get high stats. Like the fellow who said, well, what's your 18? Everyone's got to have an 18.
Yeah.
Everyone's got to be equal at the table. We've all got to have a chance to be wonderful. That's really something that was pushed by 3rd edition, and there's a bit of irony there, because in that edition, the ability scores mattered way more.
Oh, yeah.
And they matter way more now than they ever did when I was playing 2nd edition. You know, they matter in a certain sense in 2nd edition, because you can't be a paladin unless you have 17 charisma and 15 constitution, and you have to roll these by the innermost rules. You have to roll these 3d6 in order. So a paladin is as rare as they're supposed to be. When you approach it as, this is going to be my hobby for 11 years, this game ran from 89 to 2000.
Wow.
Well, you're probably going to roll a couple of paladins, or one day you're just going to say, right, well, how about I be a paladin, DM? And I'll say, yeah, okay, or just take the minimum if you don't manage the minimum, something my games master used to do. There's a couple of different ways you can do it, just to have the experience. But it was made a rarefied class, and that was considered part of its balance, because the paladin is arguably the most powerful of the classes.
Yeah.
It's the hardest to play, but it's the most powerful, and it's become so dilute now that it no longer exists.
Right.
There's a class with its name in modern D&D, but the paladin is gone.
That's an interesting philosophy on that. I mean,
so's the thief. Also, it's gone. There's a rogue, but you can never again have the experience of thief.
Right.
Because in 3rd edition, they started becoming really obsessed about, well, what everyone's got to have something to do in combat.
Yes.
Right.
Everyone's got to be balanced during battle.
Yep.
Whereas in the old editions, they say, well, unless you're a warrior, you really shouldn't be fighting. Even if you're a cleric, and the cleric's fairly robust.
Yes.
You really shouldn't be. When the fighting starts, that's the warrior class's job, and there's 3 warrior classes in the core book. Those are fighter, paladin, and ranger. And the fighter is the best at fighting. Nothing else even comes close. The fighter is the best class at fighting. There's no argument about that.
Yep.
It's the best at trading blows down and dirty with the enemy. and the ranger and the paladin have other advantages. Right? For a start, the ranger can use 2 weapons with no penalty.
Oh.
What do you got to do now as a ranger to use 2 weapons? You've kind of got to build into it. So if you have this idea, I'm going to be dressed. I'm going to be a ranger like dressed. It's going to be great. Mm-hmm. I'm going to. What do I have to do? I've got to take this feat and this feat, this feat, or in the modern one, I think you've got to go down this certain path. I'm not that familiar with 5th, sorry. Or I have to take this option and this option, and then by 5th level, I'll be like it. I'll only have this penalty and this penalty.
Yep.
Level 1 2nd edition rangers can do it. That's just what rangers do.
Right.
You don't get things drip fed to you in 2nd edition like you do. Like, for example, the paladin. The very famous and most contentious class in the game, arguably.
Mm-hmm.
Most of the stuff that makes him famous, he has at level 1. There's only a couple of things he gets later, like turning undead as one, and casting the pre-spells. He gets that at level 9.
Right.
So, you are in the world, born into this world, a fully developed example of your class. Basically. Is what I'm saying. You don't have to build into it, which is really magic.
Yeah, no, I agree. Even just bringing up the ranger, I was like, let me take a look at that, because that's not usually a class that anybody that that my social group really goes after. And it's interesting you mentioned just being a ranger, just doing it, because in 5th edition at the 2nd level you get to choose a fighting style, but you can only choose one. So you have to end up determining if do you want to do archery or do you want to do weapon fighting, among a couple of other options. But you won't be able to be proficient in both of them. But as a ranger, in my mind's eye, they should be able to do both. So I completely understand where you're coming from there.
In 2nd edition, they can.
You're making me want to play that more than 5th edition at this point.
Well, I think you should try it. There'll be stuff you don't like.
Okay.
Like I said, anyone who is thinking about giving 2nd edition AD&D a go, there's stuff you're not going to like. That's fine. It is old hat. And it's written in an old hat way. The books aren't organised the way you're going to like them.
Okay.
That's it. You've just got to take it. If you want to give it a go, you've just got to accept that. Still, it's a fine example of D&D, which is, even though it's not my favourite role-playing game, it is the greatest role-playing game. It's the greatest and most important.
Yes.
And I don't think it was ever better than AD&D 2nd edition, which is why I recommend it habitually to people. And I can't say it absolutely. I haven't played every edition.
I think that would take a lot of time to go through every edition.
Yes.
To truly get.
I wouldn't recommend it.
I think I have one final question for you, and that's just, what's your favorite class?
The Bard. I'll be specific. The 2nd edition Bard.
There you go.
Any of the other ones.
There you go. That's fair. Let me ask you just about the Bard in general, because I remember from EverQuest the Bard was the jack of all trades, but like master of none.
That's it.
Yeah. I played a Bard for very little time in EverQuest, and I loved every minute of playing with it. It was so fun.
No one can catch you.
It's true. It's very true.
You've got the speed magic.
Yes. Yes.
It saved my life on many an occasion.
Well, that is a great insight, Bard. Thank you so much for sharing your manifesto on 2nd edition.
I loved it.
It's not even complete. I've got extra to talk about.
Yeah, we've got more.
No, we should do another episode of this. Absolutely, because I'm sure some people who are in the know about D&D knows that right now that for the very first time, Wizards of the Coast is actually trying to put out their own app essentially for 5th edition. I am in the beta right now. I think it's an open beta.
Edition, isn't it?
What did I say?
4th.
Oh, 5th.
Yeah. I only corrected because of the restriction. It has to be not.
Thank you. For the 5th edition. It's an open beta right now, which is kind of fun because they're letting everybody give feedback on not only the information that's involved in the app, but also just the layout of it as a whole.
Yeah.
It's an interesting idea. My understanding is it's not meant to replace books.
Oh.
They will have the books, but it's meant to be a supplement.
Okay.
Essentially, for the on-the-go player.
I see.
So I think that as that develops, I think we should definitely talk a little bit more about D&D, about the different versions, and just the overall. I'd love to talk one day about just the ramifications of D&D in pop culture and how much it changed everything.
That's a great topic.
Oh man,
I know that at the Bard's table, no electronics are allowed.
Oh.
Yeah. Well, it's really just to help things not become between you and your imagination. Obviously is. Because when you're staring at a screen, even if it's like an app that's supposed to help, they're going to bung some pictures in there, right? I know this happens to me, and it's going to happen to other people. Is when I'm playing a ranger, and I've got my own internal image of what he looks like and so forth.
Yeah.
If I look at the ranger page on some app and there's a picture of a ranger, that's going to infect my
Yeah.
internalization of my character. I'll start picturing him as this. That's a sign of a very active imagination. So it's a good sign, but it really gets. It's why I don't like miniatures, because, as I said, they just replace imagination. I would love. Something I forgot. I wish I'd talked about, but I didn't. I would love to get your response to second edition's initiative system.
Oh, what? Now I'm intrigued.
Okay, let's do that, and then we'll wrap up the show.
Okay, because every time I mention this to people, the response is generally always a variation of, why don't we still do that?
Okay.
So it is, in my opinion, the second best initiative system ever in a role-playing game. The best being the one from Judge Dredd role-playing game in 1985.
Oh, they made.
I didn't know they made a Judge Dredd role-playing game.
Its initiative system is masterwork. There's nothing else like it. I've never seen anything like it.
Wow.
That's a whole other thing.
Okay.
In Dungeons and Dragons, second edition, say we were playing, and you're about to fight some orcs. Say negotiations have broken down.
Of course.
They're about to be drawn.
As they do.
First thing in a modern game is that your DM will say, right, roll initiative.
Yep.
And okay, that's normal. That's not the first thing that happens in second edition.
Oh.
The first thing that happens is that, because there's no surprise or anything happening, we don't have to worry about that in this.
Right.
Okay.
The dungeon master decides what the orcs are going to do privately. Right. He doesn't have to write it down. He just decides. We'll
Okay.
stitch with it. And then the players all declare what they are going to do during the round. And quite often, when you start playing second edition, it's not long before the players start huddling. And they'll say, well, I'll do this, then you do this, then you do this. And
Okay.
what they're actually doing is working out the chances that they'll get to be able to do these things when they want. Because only at that point, after they've declared what they're going to do, is initiative rolled.
Oh.
Now, initiative is rolled for each side. So the enemy side will roll a d10 for their initiative, and the players will roll a d10 for their initiative.
Okay.
And what the players are doing, and their actual initiative score, is modified by the action they're taking. So if they're using... the example in the book, which I really like, is the dwarf blowing his horn of blasting. And that adds a +3 to his initiative, so it's going to take longer. Whereas if you're wielding a two-handed sword, I believe it's weapon speed adds to your initiative. So it's a 6 or a 7, something like that.
Okay.
So it takes longer. So you can sit and you can sort of calculate the risk, right? I'm going to go last. I'm probably going to go last with this, so I need to think about what the other players are doing, and so that my attack will fit. Or if the enemy has a wizard, what you want to do is use a weapon or take an action that is fast, because he'll start casting when it's not even technically his turn.
Uh-huh.
And if you hit him before his spell is cast, it'll spoil the spell.
Yes.
So you want to be quick, all right? And in the rules, in the actual round, everything sort of happens at once. It all goes bang, and it's all resolved in the order that your initiative falls. So the slowest actions will happen last, and the fastest actions will happen quick. And every spell has a casting time, which is added to the group's initiative score to determine what yours is. And some of them can be quite long. Some are quicker than others, and it's just fascinating to see it all go down this way, because you only have to declare one action, right? There's only one action you can do in the turn. You're doing one thing.
Right.
What am I doing this round? I'm doing this one thing. And each round is assumed to go for a minute, which sounds absurd to modern ears as well, because they're used to 6 seconds. Or
Right,
10
exactly.
seconds. Okay. Well, a round is a minute, so you can walk quite a long way in a minute, or you can do quite a lot in a minute. So a round of fighting is really a lot of back and forth, steel on steel stuff. If you're going to attack that round, then there's a lot of description we can get in, and we can, depending on what happens, we can really get into the descriptions on stuff like that. It's wonderful. But the initiative system, it's I don't know. I just love this, declaring first, trying to work out a plan,
And then
see
find out
how
if it worked.
plays out. The only awkward thing that some people find it awkward, I know, is that you have to roll your initiative every round.
Oh.
New initiative.
Okay.
Yeah. Both sides will get a new initiative. And there's a couple of variations on the initiative rules that you can just switch between at will. You don't have to pick one for the campaign. You just switch between them as they become convenient.
Okay.
Like there's individual, so each player will roll their initiative with their individual unrelated combats on the other side of the castle, for example. You might do individual initiative there. But how does that sound to you?
I think there's a lot to like about that. First of all, one of the key things you said right at the end there was that you re-roll your initiative, because as a player who rolls low typically with a d20, and I'm always like, well, I'll see you guys at the other end of the turn because I won't be doing anything. I love that concept where I'm like, okay, here's my shot again.
There's another chance.
Yeah,
I
I can actually do something in this fight. I love the fact that you're doing it all simultaneously because it's more real in a sense.
It increases the sense of urgency.
Yeah, were you in a scenario like that? Were you in a real fight? You're not going to be over there like, okay, I'm going to punch him in the face. All right, I failed. You punch him in the face now.
Right, yeah. No, it gives your players more haste.
Yes. It also...
The point when you're actually taking your turn is the same time everyone else is doing it. That's when you're declaring your actions. So you're not watching the other players have their go.
No.
Yeah.
You're doing it all together.
Yeah, and that's kind of almost more of a team building kind of moment for everyone.
Yeah, everybody kind of learns like, Yeah,
and if you're a healer, I can imagine that puts a little more importance on what you're doing, because for the most part, if you're playing a healer in any other edition, you can just wait until you know you need to cast the spell. You'd be like, I'm just going to do damage until whatever. But now you got to kind of think ahead, like, all right, well, if they're successful in this turn on hitting such player, I'm going to have this ready to go.
Yeah.
Risk management.
I really like that. That brings a whole nother level of interest, and just I didn't necessarily know if it makes it more difficult. It's just more exciting.
Yeah.
It's different. There's a certain sense, just because it's a new thing.
Yes.
It's the same old initiative for a start.
Yeah.
Having used it, it's magic.
Yeah. That's something I would love to try, just to see how that type of initiative goes, because like I said, like when I'm a player, I'm the person who's like, I rolled a 5 and I have a +1, so
so I'll see you at the end. Yeah.
So hopefully you guys won't have killed everything,
right?
Because then you don't get to do anything, and that does happen.
Yeah.
If with the current initiative system, if you consistently miss, you don't get to participate at all.
Right.
Because you have to wait until your turn comes back around, as opposed to what you're suggesting, where it's, nope, everybody's trying at the same time.
Yeah.
Yep. Even if it doesn't work out.
Yeah.
You're waiting for the resolution of your action to come around.
Yeah. Right. I really like that.
Yeah. It's neat.
I think that's a lot of fun, and I get what you're saying now. As we've been talking, I'm starting to get a better idea as to why you kind of wish we would go back to that. And I know, I'm sure for Wizards, at this point, it's difficult for them to go...
To be able to roll back.
I wouldn't expect them to. Even if they wanted to, I'd say don't even do it.
Exactly.
Because the environment of the game and the culture no longer exists.
Right.
Yeah.
In which we can, approach the game natively and enjoy it that way.
Mm-hmm.
It'd be some weird mutant version.
Right.
Yeah,
because they could never...
By necessity, they'd come out with a weird version.
Yeah.
It's true, they could never simply just reprint 2nd edition and say, this is new and you're going to enjoy it. No, they would have to do a hybrid or some kind of pilot that includes different versions so that it wouldn't alienate all players.
Oh, no, they would severely update all of the material. They would update all of the art. They would update everything on it.
Beautiful. Yeah. Only to find out that it's...
They did reprint 2nd edition, though.
Did they?
Yeah, a couple of years ago they did special edition.
Did
the 3 core books
did they update all the art?
No, well, it was of the revised edition, which is just a reprinting with different organisation and different art, which is
okay. That's kind of nice.
Does that excite you, or was that kind of like was it a poor reprint?
No, it was fine.
Okay,
that's great.
It was fine. It was just a reprint of the old 2nd edition, just for... I don't know why they did it, and I'm not sure what year they did that. It's fairly recent.
But that's positive, though, because anyone who's listening who is looking to get a hold of this, you might have a better chance now.
You don't have to go hunting.
You don't have to get in your time machine.
Although I like that. as a fan of old school comics myself, and
Yes.
I grew up looking for them, hunting, going to different like hobby shops and trying to find my sacred edition. I like the idea of being like, oh, there's something out of print, you have to go look for it.
Look, I appreciate the adventure, but I got to tell you, the merchants don't tend to want to bargain with you, regardless of how high
that's true.
your charisma is.
Listen, there's something I've got to tell you about that. I think it was a limited run.
Oh,
And
no!
If you're looking for... Well, actually, you're not out of luck, because I believe second edition books aren't that rare.
Okay,
And it doesn't matter if you get the 1989 print or the 1996 print,
okay.
which is the revised. It doesn't matter. It's the same game.
Okay.
The
That's
layout-
great.
The layout's better in the later one, but the art's better in the earlier one.
Mm.
Yeah, art really matters to me.
Oh yeah,
know.
that I know, and I completely understand that. That's just not to go too far into comics.
Yeah.
But for me, as much as comics are about the story, since they are a medium that kind of needs both to
Work.
create this perfect story and just this very different
This
type.
experience.
Yeah, exactly. The art will make or break a book for me.
Oh, no
every
question.
time.
Yeah, same here.
There's an adage that people regurgitate as accepted wisdom, which is you can't judge a book by its cover. Hogwash. I'll tell you, I go to the book exchange and I'll walk out with an armload of books that I've bought just for their cover art.
Yeah.
And cover art is important in books, it's important in RPGs, because the first and primary, most major thing it does is calibrates your imagination. That's what it does. That's when you look at the second edition books, you'll see this beautiful art style by Jeff Easley or Larry Elmore, or those classic artists who worked on D&D a lot back then. And it really gets your mind ready to accept an older era of art, because no one produces this kind of art anymore.
No.
Even though they made an effort in the 5th edition to sort of have a little bit of that painted style back,
Yes.
it doesn't really work. Even though there's a lot of pictures in the 5th edition core book that I actually do really like.
I agree.
It's fairly strong, and it's a lot better than the garbage 4th edition. And 5th edition wasn't great. My old dungeon master Frankie, he came up with a nice short term that described the art style of 3rd edition basically the day it came out. And he described it simply as belt, 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 buckle, 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 chain, 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 chain. He took one look at the Sorcerer, I think, it was in the 3rd edition book, and he decided that's what the art style was. And its elaborateness and overblownness is exactly what we got
That's
for a long while.
spectacular.
Uh,
That is absolutely that's an amazing description of that.
yeah, I'm
Absolutely.
glad it's out there.
But I do agree with you. The art does it puts you in a mindset. It
Yeah.
it has often drawn me to a character, to a class, to a race, just based on what I see, and then where that then takes me.
It sets the tone.
Yes.
For me, anyway. Like, I want to, kind of recreate or surpass the images that I see in these editions.
Oh, absolutely. Especially when they show you a character who's clearly of a higher level. It gives you a goal, like, I could be that someday.
Yeah.
Or better.
Right.
And hopefully you will live through it.
Yeah.
I will...
Forces classic archetypes too.
Yeah.
Yes.
Which is what D&D should do. I've harped on about that. And I'm so disappointed in the 5th edition Barbarian, for example.
Oh.
It should look like the classic Conan, okay?
Yeah.
The reason for this is because you take one look and you know Barbarian.
Right.
Yes.
Everything you need to know is already queued up in your brain, and you're ready to accept the class. When you read the class description, it just all goes in, because the guy there doesn't look like a barbarian. He looks like some kind of settler.
He looks like Thor.
like a-
He looks very Nordic. It looks like they're pulling from almost like Skyrim.
Yeah.
That's fine, but he looks like a civilized guy. It doesn't really
Yeah.
say, classic fantasy barbarian.
There is
No.
no
If there's
skin.
if there's anything that D&D should always be, it's classic fantasy.
Yeah.
Yes.
No, this guy, he looks like the Beast from Beauty and the Beast. Like, he does not look... No, there's no muscularity. There's no... there's
no muscularity. There's no muscularity. It's not there.
No, it just looks like a guy who could, like, maybe works out every couple of weeks. Like, there's no... Yeah, no. He should be... His costume should be his body.
I don't doubt that he's a fine warrior or anything. He looks like a warrior.
Right.
Yes.
I'm sure he's a good guy.
Yeah.
But
He doesn't evoke barbarian. He
What
doesn't
about-
evoke
No,
the
he's
wildness,
very
the
different.
animism.
now, based on our company, I'm just curious, what does the dwarf look like?
There's a woman. She looks grand. She's got a double-handed hammer, if I remember correctly.
Yes, she does.
Oh yeah.
Which speaks very highly to a friend of ours. She loves playing dwarves, and especially ones who wield
hammers.
Yeah, hammer maidens, if you will.
Let me my kind of woman.
Yeah, that's almost that's almost exclusively what she likes to play.
Yeah, every time.
Yeah,
Dwarves.
Amazing. Amazing.
And tends to go towards the fighter side of it. Yeah, absolutely. I gotta say, before we go, I just, you mentioned the fact that, you encourage people to go and try 2nd edition. And for those who've never played D&D, but maybe you've dabbled in MMOs, just know that you can always go back in D&D and play an edition. No edition that comes afterwards changes the game, so that you can't play that. And an MMO, an expansion comes out, it forever changes the game. And unless the company has a legacy server or something like that, or lets you play vanilla, you can never go back. It's over. The experience you had, you'll never have again. But you can with these. You can always go back. As long as you can get the books, as long as you can get the material, you can have the experience.
It's not hard to get either. Even if you can't buy hard copy books, there's loads of ways you can get the text.
Yeah. Well, Bard, this has been a stimulating, riveting conversation. I hope we can do a sequel episode sometime soon.
Yes.
And hopefully it will be a lot less time that will pass between episodes.
I hope so. I didn't get to talk about half the stuff I wanted to talk about.
I know.
No,
but we'll get there.
We have to have another one of these.
I pledge we
absolutely do.
This feels like it's been the 2nd edition podcast, actually, because we paid lip service to a couple of other editions. It's mainly been me banging on about the olden days.
Well, we talked about that was kind of the plan. I think we were like, well, let's focus on this one, and then we'll get into the others if there's time. And I think next time we'll definitely get into.
I think that more people are more aware of everything from 3 and up, so I think it's absolutely fair to give to
its. Yeah, I guarantee you there are very few podcasts that will talk about or champion the benefits of THAC0 or 2nd edition.
There's a definite upside to it.
Yeah,
absolutely.
But from all of us here, I want to thank you for watching. And, of course, if you want to go check out everything the Bard has to offer, you can go to youtube.com/Bardic Broadcast or check the description box below this video to enjoy it. And please absorb every unboxing, every single one. Even if you're not necessarily interested in whatever the subject matter is, I guarantee you there is something for everyone in every episode. I rewatch that channel every chance I get, so check it out. And Bard, thank you so much.
Don't make me responsible for that.
And as by the way, you should also be excited to see the next episode of the unboxings. The Bard has one working out soon. I'm charged with reminding him to finish the video and get it out there so that everyone can enjoy.
It's on its way.
No fear. I won't put a date on it, but I will say it's on its way. But thanks a lot for everybody, and we'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.